Is everybody okay? Are we following? Okay. Now I apologize. There's probably a lot of sort of lecture tonight because I kind of have a lot of material. I have to get through some of this, but I'm going to simplify and it won't be too long either. So you'll be able to go a little earlier than usual. So maybe that'll be kind of an incentive for you. Okay. Core processes. I mean, look at this again. Dynamic. Look at the second word. What's it say? Dynamic what? Shared leadership. Remember we talked about sage on the stage doesn't work anymore in teaching, right? Doesn't go anymore. Sometimes they use what they talk about now is we call it distributed leadership. Okay, is where you have a cluster, an individual, and then the tasks are shared. I've worked in a school. I worked in a school when I was in South Korea that had no management. 2,000 students. 2,000 students. It was one of the biggest language academies of its kind anywhere in the country. Okay? We had a personnel director, but he wasn't really a manager. And actually, after a while, the owner of the school appointed me to be like the coordinator. But even that wasn't, I was still teaching. It wasn't a management position. Okay? And here's how she did it. We had a school owner, but she wasn't a manager either because she taught. She taught more than any of us. She taught 56 contact hours a week. Now, if you guys have ever done, anybody that's done any teaching knows that that's nuts. Nobody does 56 contact hours a week. She did. So she was teaching more than any of us. Okay, talk about lead by example. But what she did not do is she didn't do any management. It was all distributed. There was this one particular lady that was there who was quite good with the younger students. She was a kindergarten teacher, trained as a kindergarten teacher, had many years of experience in the state of Connecticut, and so she was in charge of handling anything to do with the little ones. Okay? I had done a little bit of systems work and so on in the military and that, so I was kind of the guy that was asked to do the attendance and later sort of coordinate teacher issues, so they kind of came through me for teacher issues. There was another guy there who was very good with theory, and he had a doctorate in history, and so he tended to be anything to do with setting up new course material or research. He was the guy. This was all informal. None of it was written down. And you know what? That's the best place I've ever worked. Still now. And I love where I'm working right now. Like, it's a great school that I'm at right now. But I'll always remember that school is the best place I've ever worked in education. And I probably think that that may be the way I feel all the way through my life. I don't know. It may change. I may get somewhere else that seems better. But the point is, by doing that, by distributing the shared leadership of putting everybody, talk about total quality management. There were no systems, there were no circles, but everybody knew. You can't say, this is the interesting thing in schools that we often do, and you see this all the time, especially in big schools, okay, is that if something gets messed up, well, I told those curriculum guys they didn't listen, right? Or if the discipline is not working very well, why doesn't the vice principal give us a hand with this? It's ridiculous, right? Or if the academics are not working, man, the principal's never in the classrooms, right? Or if the kids are misbehaving, man, those parents, how come they can't do something about those kids, right? And the principals do the same thing, right? It's like, well, things aren't working in the classrooms. I try to get those teachers to teach better, but they just won't listen, right? There's always somebody else you can blame, right? In a big system, isn't it true? And we all do it. I'm guilty. Yeah, me too. Right? There's always somebody else you can blame. But when you have total shared leadership, Mrs. Lee's school in Korea, who are you going to blame? It's Mrs. Lee's fault. No, it's not. She gave the task to me and I didn't do it. Or then you go, it's your buddy's fault. Your buddy looks at you and goes, well, what about the task that you were given last week? So nobody points fingers. You just don't do it. Because it's totally shared. That was an organization where the leadership was 100% shared. Now, is it always going to work? Probably not. But in that school, it really worked. A couple of questions. I think Mark had a question first, and then, okay? Yeah.
I was just going to point that out. To be able to do that, minimize supervision to almost non-existence, you really have to have people who have leadership abilities, number one, and self-sufficiency as well.
Yeah.
To that.
Very true. Yeah, you're right. Very true. Mrs. Lee told me, because we sat down, after a while when I was doing the CSL coordinator thing, we got to be good friends. So, we used to have sort of a dinner once a week and we just sit and talk over how the school is going and so on. And I said to her, I said, how do you do this? I said, this is a pretty phenomenal school. I said, you don't give any direction to anybody, and yet it works. And you have a reputation. People come from all over the country to go to your school. I said, how do you do it? What's your philosophy? And she said, Andy, it's very simple. She said, I hire the best teachers I can find, and I leave them alone. She said, it's all in my hiring. She said, I don't stress anything else. She said, I don't care about money. I mean, like, I can't pay millions of dollars, but I'll pay whatever the market rate is, whatever the top market rate is. And her pay was very good. Whatever the top market rate is, I'll pay it. And I'll charge the students' parents a little more. And they'll pay it. They're happy to pay it because they know they're getting a good service. But you're exactly right. If you have, like the other example I gave, if you did that with novice teachers, you'd be in trouble. You'd be in a lot of trouble. So it's a very good point. Lakshmi, please.
When you were saying, right, that in these kind of systems, nobody really points fingers at the others and all. But then if there's a problem, how do they find the root of the problem? Like, if no one, I mean, like if there's a problem somewhere, right, like you have to track it down, right, from actually who did it belong to or who did what and all that. How do they do all that tracking and all that?
I'll tell you, the way it tended to work, and this is, I'm quoting a motivational speaker by the name of Zig Ziglar when I say this, but in fact, this is actually how it worked in that school. And Zig Ziglar used to say, people are spending all their time fixing the blame. Fixing means, in this sense, means finding someone to blame. It doesn't mean fixing like taking care of it. So you fix means you can point the finger. Fix can also mean to fix something, to make it better. So what Ziglar said is, in many organizations, all of the time is spent fixing the blame, and none of the time is spent fixing the problem. And in fact, in Mrs. Lee's school, it was the opposite. And here's why. See, the interesting thing is, first of all, Dr. Mark makes a good point. You can't do something like that unless you have a fairly competent staff. There's no question about that. And also a fairly high integrity staff. If you've got somebody that is only out for me and is dishonest, even if they're competent, they're going to take advantage of it. There's no question. Okay? So you need to have those two things, the competency and also the integrity. It has to be there. Yeah, sure. Yeah, otherwise it won't work, right? So going back to what Lakshmi was saying, though, is that in that kind of school, given that you have the integrity and the competency, people are not bought into the idea that it has to be someone else's problem. You just sit down and figure out how to take care of it. And everybody works on it together. And you know what? People tend to own up to problems in that situation. Because everybody knows that they're not going to get blamed, that nobody is there to blame anybody, right? So, I mean, I know there were times, now, there are times still in other schools I've worked in when I've screwed up. And normally I own up to it just because maybe I'm a dumb guy, that's what I do. But you know, there's schools where you own up to stuff, you get in trouble. But in that school, you own up to something and people, you know what people do? They say, oh, no, wait a minute now, it wasn't totally you. You know, I say, okay, that attendance scheme was mine and I set it up and it didn't work. And you know, now we've got students that are not being tracked properly and I'm sorry I messed up. You know what somebody else is going to say? Wait a minute now, Andy, it wasn't all you. You know, I remember being in a meeting and I said that I backed up that system, I thought it would work. That's what happens. And the reason it happens is because the responsibility really is shared and everybody's bought into it. Okay? Now, I have to be honest, it's a very special culture when you have an organization like that. Can it fail? Absolutely it can fail. If you don't have the right mix of people, if you don't have the right personal qualities in your people, and competency level, you know, the issue, and sometimes, it's not always about integrity, it's about competency. If you don't know how to do something, right, you still will have trouble in an organization like that because you don't know. You need someone to tell you what to do. Does that make sense? Okay. So those, yeah, go ahead.
It's really hard to find schools as such.
Not too hard. They are rare, but not
They're
too
there.
hard. They're there.
But
Yes.
yeah, you don't really, I mean, the way you describe it, over here, let's say in Thailand, I mean, I haven't seen much schools.
The tutoring school that I worked at, she has actually different leadership styles. With me, she pretty much embodies exactly what that person, that Ms. Lee, that Andy was talking about. But if she sees a novice needing help in anything, she becomes a bit autocratic and stuff, authoritarian, autocratic. She laissez-faire. She just goes in between. But yeah, they're there.
Yeah. And what it is, when people often have a legalistic model, and this is probably more of an American problem, to be honest with you. And when I say American problem, I mean the Canadians to a certain extent. I'm talking about sort of the Western mindset. I'm using America as kind of a stereotype, which may not be totally fair, but I'm not trying to characterize. But if you look at it and you say the legalistic model, right, of this law says this law says this. Countries that are high in that kind of model have trouble with this. And it's ironic because this is put together, and I'm not sure if Glatthorn's American or not, but I think that this is certainly a Western mindset to put this material together. However, this is difficult, the more legalistic your approach is. I've been in schools. I always try to be generic and say I've been in school because I'm not interested in saying anything bad about a particular school or anything good. But if I got something good to say, I'll say it openly with the name because I think that's wonderful. But I don't think people generally like to have the bad news shared. And I don't think it's appropriate because if I've worked in a place, I shouldn't be calling that place down, regardless. Okay. So, but I mean, I've worked in schools that have a legalistic approach, that have all these documents. Hundreds and hundreds, even thousands of pages to try to cover everything. And the thinking is, you need all that. It's like you need all this armament. And what is the basic assumption behind that? Can you think about it? What is it? What is the assumption that says you need hundreds of pages of documents? Because what? People fill in the blanks. People can't. Not necessarily.
Shifting blame, covering.
Kind of. People can't what? I'm thinking people can't be one word.
Responsible.
Well, people can't be trusted. Isn't that the heart of what you're saying? When you put a system like that in place, you're really saying people can't be trusted. Now here's the question that I have for you. Now you guys know that in many situations in here we've talked about things and I've said, well, we're on the honor system, right? Now I say, well, if it's extreme, obviously I'm going to check it. Somebody hasn't done a single reflection, says they've done 10, well, I'll probably know, right? But in general, I've said we're on the honor system. Talk about plagiarism, we're on the honor system. What does that mean? We've said that several times. Or it's a gentleman's course. What am I saying when I say it? Or ladies' course, same thing. Okay? What am I saying by that?
I believe trust.
I believe in you guys, I trust you, right? Now here's the interesting thing. The interesting thing is, and I won't ask you to put up your hands, but I'll ask a question and I think I know what the answer is. The fact that I'm doing that, does that decrease or increase the chance that you're going to be truthful with me? And I think if you think inside, all of you know that it increases vastly. In fact, it makes it. I've had people on this course tell me personally that it's almost impossible for them to even conceive of cheating on this course. They couldn't do it. Because they know what the trust is, that it's there. Right? Okay? So the point I'm making there is, it always comes back to that. It's interesting, there's a clothing organization in America, Nordstrom. Very, very high-end clothing retailer. Tom Peters talks about this organization in many of his books. And he talks about all of this legalism and all of these documents and manuals that we have to protect ourselves from the one person who's going to cheat us. And also, by the way, when you do that, you create more people to cheat. Because everybody says, if you're going to give me all these rules, I'll see if I can figure out how to beat them. People, that's natural. Same thing with kids. Give kids 100 rules, they're going to try to figure out a way. Give them 1 rule or 2 rules, they'll probably follow it, right? Because they know that you believe in it. But it's like this retailer, they have an employee manual. And their employee manual says, and this is exactly, I'm going to quote it word for word. Nordstrom retailer, and here is what their employee manual says. This is it. This is what every employee has to look at and sign. This is it. This is the whole manual. I'm not making it up. It's true. That's it. There's no 300 pages of rules. There's no procedures. There's nothing. There's this. Use your own best judgment at all times. That's it. That's their employee manual. And it's funny because the lawyers had a nightmare. The lawyers freaked out.